Yes, I think we're making a lot of progress. I think we're showing great strength. I think they understand we have unparalleled strength. There has never been strength like it. You know, we sent 3 of the largest aircraft carriers in the world, and they're right now positioned. We have a nuclear submarine also positioned. We have many things happening that we hope, in fact, I'll go a step further. We hope to God we never have to use. With that being said, I really believe that it makes sense for North Korea to come to the table and to make a deal that's good for the people of North Korea and the people of the world. I do see certain movement, yes, but let's see what happens.
That was the president yesterday traveling abroad as his trip continues to Asia, 5 countries there. And joining us now from Capitol Hill, member of the Armed Services and Intelligence Committee's Independent Senator Angus King of Maine. Senator, good morning. Thanks for being with us. You do sit on Armed Services. Do you share the president's optimism that there's some kind of a deal on the horizon that would perhaps scale back North Korea's nuclear program?
Well, I don't know what he knows in terms of the imminence of any kind of discussions. I think we're not necessarily close to a deal. What I hope we're close to is talking, is some discussions, is some kind of effort toward resolution, because a military action, we've heard all kinds of data in the last few weeks about how difficult that would be. And I think, you know, he's playing it tough and indicating to them that there will be consequences if they do something aggressive toward us. And the other piece that this has to involve is China. China is the only country that really has any true power over North Korea. So hopefully what we're seeing is the beginning of the dance of diplomacy, of getting to the point where there are some discussions and a freeze in their program at the current time, and then talking about denuclearization. And we don't know what that means for the rest of the peninsula, but I'm reminded of the Cuban Missile Crisis, where an agreement not to invade, plus the removal of the Jupiter missiles in Turkey, was the key to that deal to get those Russian missiles out of Cuba. Hopefully we can get to the point where we have those kinds of discussions.
And do you believe those discussions have begun to take place? In other words, is there progress? And would you concede that the president's approach maybe has made some of that progress? Tough public talk to North Korea and then working behind the scenes to get through to China into North Korea.
Yeah, I think that's the right path, and you know, the problem is, and the difficulty is, if you're indicating strength and you're talking about resolve and nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers, at what point is that misunderstood on the North Korean side as an imminent threat? That's the danger of this game. But I do think you've got to demonstrate to the North Koreans that they're facing overwhelming strength, as the president said, and that it's in their interest to try to make some kind of discussion. Ultimately, the reason the North Koreans have wanted to develop nuclear weapons is as a kind of insurance policy for Kim Jong-un to keep his job. And to the extent we can transfer that fear, that paranoia, that's the ultimate end of this, I think. But it's a very dangerous situation. The president's in a delicate situation. He's got to demonstrate strength, but he's also got to have Rex Tillerson or others involved in some discussions. That's where it has to go, and I think it has to start in China.
David Ignatius.
Senator King, you've been a careful observer of the investigation of Russia's activities during our campaign. I'm curious what you made of Carter Page's testimony that was released yesterday before the House committee, and in particular whether you're beginning to see a pattern of Trump campaign officials, however junior, having conversations with the Russians that look an awful lot like, we'll give you this piece of information, hoping for better relations down the road. Did you have any of that feeling as you looked at the transcript?
Well, it's a similar kind of feeling that you had with Papadopoulos, and I think you guys have talked about this morning the Ukrainian amendment, if you will, in the Republican Party platform, the June 9th meeting with Donald Trump Jr. and the higher people in the campaign. There clearly were these kinds of discussions, and I think one of the disturbing things is the fact of these kind of contacts and discussions and trips have had to be dragged out. They weren't They weren't volunteered. They weren't brought forth promptly, and that raises questions. If they weren't telling us, why is that? But, I've been thinking about this. This is a tortoise and a hare kind of thing. You guys are the hare. You're rushing and wanting to get to conclusions, and we're the tortoise. We're interviewing 100 witnesses and working slowly. Director Mueller is working slowly, bit by bit, and that's the way an investigation like this works. Compare it with Watergate, where you had 4 guys in a 2-hour event. We're talking about something that stretched over 18 months. According to the Wall Street Journal, it may have actually gone back into 2015 when the Russians started tweeting on behalf of Donald Trump. And it's a long process, hundreds, perhaps thousands of people involved, and another country. And so it's complex and slow, and I know it's frustrating for us and for the American people, but that's the way these things have to proceed.
Senator, on another topic, we're learning new information about Sunday's massacre in the small-town church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, that killed 26 people, injured 20 more. Officials say the gunman may have been targeting his mother-in-law, who attends First Baptist Church, but who was not at the service when the man opened fire Sunday morning. Meanwhile, the military is investigating how the Air Force failed to enter the gunman's domestic violence court-martial into a federal database. That would have prevented him from owning a gun. We're also learning more about the extent of that violence. According to Air Force records, while stationed in New Mexico in 2012, he fractured his baby stepson's skull, and as the New York Times reports, repeatedly hit, kicked, and choked his ex-wife. He was charged and pleaded guilty in 2014 to cruelty to animals, and despite all this, still able to purchase guns in Colorado and Texas. So, Senator, my question to you is, how troubled are you by the fact that the Air Force did not alert the FBI and get this man's name into the federal database that should have prevented him from purchasing the weapons he used to kill 26 people in Texas?
I'm very troubled because our main defense against things like this is background checks, trying to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. And clearly that was the case. And I don't know whether it was an administrative error or somebody deliberately decided, well, this isn't important enough. And you get into distinctions between what type of discharge did he get? Was it dishonorable? No, it wasn't. And was it administrative? All of those things. But clearly we've got to get to the bottom of this. And the entire Defense Department, in my view, has to review policies to be sure that this information gets into databases. I'm also interested in, apparently he had a variety of guns in the car. Where did he get all of them, and where did they come from, and how did he get them, and did he buy them all legitimately at gun stores, or what was the background on that? But yes, the answer is if we're going to have a background check system that means anything, the data has to get in there in the first place.
Yeah, as we look at solutions here, Senator, and how to prevent these from happening again, we have these conversations after these shootings that come up all too often. Background checks always come up. There should have been a background check. There is a background check system in place that failed those people in Texas. A lot of people, too, gun control advocates, saying there's no reason for a private citizen to own a military-style weapon, the type he used, an AR-15-style weapon, in that church. Do you think it's time for those to be banned, Senator?
No, I think we've got to look at that carefully. Here's the problem. I'm from a state where we have one of the highest gun ownership rates in the country, and yet we have one of the lowest rates of gun crime. An assault weapon, it's called an assault weapon, but it's simply a semi-automatic hunting rifle in costume with a different kind of stock. But the functionality of the weapon is exactly the same as there are probably, I don't know, thousands of them in Maine and Alaska all over the United States that are used by legitimate hunters. So I have a problem with banning a weapon because of its appearance. And one of the problems that we had when they did it before was they changed the appearance a little bit and the ban doesn't apply. I think there are other issues, for example, magazine size, that maybe we do need to have a discussion about, because a lot of times in these situations, apparently it's when the fellow, it's always a fellow, starts to reload, that's when you might have a chance to stop the tragedy. And so magazine size, I think, is something that we do need to talk about. But I've never been one to say, yeah, let's get rid of the assault weapons if it's really a semi-automatic hunting rifle in costume.
Senator, do the hunters you talk to in Maine, it's a sincere question, do they say they need an AR-15 to hunt deer?
No, they don't. Of course they don't. But the point is that it's the same gun. It just looks different. and they don't, and they use a more conventional semi-automatic rifle.
Right.
But it's the size of the magazine. In Maine, I think the limit is you can only have a magazine that holds five bullets when you're hunting. The question is, do you need these magazines that hold 30 or more?
So what's a constructive solution here, Senator? If you don't believe those weapons should be banned, if the background system was in place and it failed the people in Texas, what's something you can offer this morning as we try to have a conversation about how to prevent these things?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. One is we can continue to refine and improve the background check. We've found a gap in it in this case. Let's fix that with the military. Secondly, we need to fix the loopholes that are in the background check system, such as gun show, the so-called gun show loophole, or buying guns online. The trafficking in guns across state lines, I think, are all things that we can talk about. This is the Manchin-Toomey amendment that we voted on and passed, but not by quite enough votes in 2013. Bump stocks, this thing that converts a semi-automatic to essentially an automatic, ought to be banned. Should have been. The ATF should not have allowed them back in whatever it was, 2012, I think. So that we can take care of. I think we need to talk about magazine sizes. So I think there are things we can do, and we also need to talk about mental health issues. I mean, somebody that goes in and arbitrarily shoots 26 people, I think clearly has something going on, and this guy's history indicates that. But to me, the key is background checks. The old saying of the NRA for so long was, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Well, if that's the case, let's keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. We couldn't even pass a bill last year to keep people on the terrorist no-fly list from buying guns. Clearly, we ought to be making steps like that to keep them out of the hands of irresponsible and dangerous people.
And this gunman obviously should have been swept up in that background check, and now 26 people are dead because he wasn't. Senator Angus King of Maine, thank you for your time this morning. Coming up.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.